Hey guys, welcome back to the part 3 of where we're writing a pivot point trading robot. And today in part 3 we'll be looking at stop loss and lot sizes. And these two go together, as we will be giving our user a choice to either select the lot size as a fixed lot size, or we're going to be asking them if they want to set it as a risk percentage of the capital. But if they select it as a risk percentage of the capital, then on every trade, let's say they say 2% of the risk, 2% risk of the capital, then we basically have to calculate, okay, where is the stop loss, how big is the stop loss from the entry point, and then based on that, then we need to calculate what is the right lot size in order to raise 2%. So these two go together, the stop losses and calculation of the lot sizes. The other thing that we will be looking at is basically where to set the stop losses, and we can give our user different choices. The first one is inactive stop loss. So there is no stop loss. So the system only opens up a trade for them, and then they define the stop loss later on. The second one can be a manual stop loss where they provide a value of 50 pips, 60 pips, 80 pips, whatever the fuck they like. And pivot point can also be a stop loss. R1 can also be a stop loss. So we need to look at these conditions, and this is how we're going to build it up. So let's get back to MetaTrader, and this is the input screen of the full EA. This is what we're going to end up with once we have written all the codes. But just to show you here, if for example, for the stop loss, the choices that I'm giving them is either inactive, manual, pivot point itself, then either the S1 or R1 or S2 and R2. But these are only possible in certain situations, depending on whether up here they're selecting the break as a trading method or the bounce as a trading method. So this is what we will be writing today, and based on our stop loss, then we will be using this that we have already defined in part 2 to then calculate the lot size, which is correct for that risk percentage. So without further ado, let's continue from where we left off in the second. So this is where we were at the end of part 2 with our EA. So let's, after the risk and management, we're going to add up a section here, and let's call it trade management. So we come back to meta editor, and below this section that we have already defined, let's create another section by saying input, and let's call it group trade management. If I compile it now and go back, then we will see now we have another section for trade management. Now, in order to give them the choice, we first have to define the choice. And if you remember that how we do it from part 1 and part 2 of the series, you know we do that by creating another enum. So this time around, I'm creating an enum and I'm calling it SL type. So that will be the variable type that we can use later on. And this variable type I'm defining as it has 5 different alternates. The first one is inactive, which I'm assigning the value of 0. The second alternate is manual, or the second choice is manual, which I'm assigning a value of 1. The third choice is pivot point. I'm assigning it a value of 2. Then S1 or R1, depending on, because you will either have S1 or R1 as your stop loss, or S2 and R2 as your stop loss. So in either case, I'm assigning it the value of 3. And then to S2 and R2, I'm assigning a value of 4. This we probably would be able to use again for when we will be doing the TP in the next part. And now that we have this enum, this variable type, now we can go ahead and give our user a choice to select from within that. And that I'm doing by creating an input variable, and the variable type is SL type, the one that we have defined here. And I'm calling this variable SL choice, so this is stop loss choice. And for default, I'm assigning the value of 1, which basically means manual. But then the user can change it. So now if I compile and go back to MetaTrader, then what I will see is that now there is a type of SL, system or manual defined, and the default choice is manual, is how we defined it. But now the user has the possibility of selecting these that we have defined in the variable type. Now, in case they select the manual option, then we need to ask them what that manual stop loss is. And this I'm doing by creating another input variable, and it's an integer variable, so it can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm calling it manual stop loss, name of the variable. The initial value I'm assigning, default value I'm assigning is 0. You can assign 50, whatever. The thing to remember is that this will be a stop loss in points, and 1 pip equals 10 points. So depending whether you want to set a 50 pip, then you have to input a value of 500. If I compile it and go back, now that we have it here as well. So if they select manual, then they also have to input a value of what do they want to see here. For now, I'm just going to go back to defaults. So we go back to meta editor and we can write all the codes here as well, but because it's going to be 4 different conditions on how we will calculate the stop loss depending on whether the bounce is selected, break is selected, and whether it's a bounce from R1 or R2. Oh, sorry, R1 or S1. So I find it neater to actually create a separate function so that we can send the values to it and get values from it. So I'm going to create a function at the bottom and I will call it calculate stop loss. And here we will do all the coding. Now there's one thing which I want to send to this function. We will send to it whether we are sending a buy order or a sell order. In that case, I can use the enum position type. And let's give it a name, which is type. So now we're going to be sending a variable value, which is whether it's a buy or it's a sell from whenever we will ask to calculate the lot size. And as an example, when I will be here, before I'm going to send a buy order, I'm going to use a double, call it stop loss. And what I can then now use is I can use the calculate stop loss. And because I'm planning to buy, so I can send the type as position type buy. Now that will send this position type buy to the function that we have just created. So then we can use that in variable type to later figure out things. Now, in order to figure out what the stop loss value is going to be in price terms, the first thing that we need to understand is, or the first thing that we need to check is whether the break is selected in our trading system or bounce is selected in our trading system, because that will heavily influence where the stop loss is going to be. So we're going to create 2 different portions of checking. So once the system comes here to calculate the stop loss, the first thing it's going to check is whether the break or the bounce is selected, which if you go back to the video number 1 or 2, if you have been through part 1 and part 2, you already know that we created this trading type here. So the user can here select whether they want to trade bounce or break of the lines. So that's what we're checking here. And then within those types, then we also have to figure out whether what we are calculating the stop loss is for either a buy or a sell. So that now I can check because I've sent this here in the function. Whenever I'll be calculating, I'll be sending to the function the value of whether I'm buying or I'm selling. So let's create those 2 here as well. So within each of those conditions, then we are calculating 2 more conditions, which is if the type selected is bounce, then within that bounce are we buying or are we selling? And then if the break is selected in the trading style, then are we buying or are we selling? So the codes here are going to be run only in case the PPR2 choice is break and the position that we are currently asking to set the stop loss for is buy. So let's look at the first type. Guys, bear with me because it's going to get a little bit complicated, but if you try and follow it closely, then it's not that difficult to understand. So the first one is for us is the condition that we are actually trading bounces. Now, in case of a bounce, when are we going to buy? We're going to buy when there is a bounce from the S1 line. Now, if there is a bounce from the S1 line, the stop loss can only be S2, system defined, or it can be manually set. It cannot be pivot point, it cannot be S1 itself. So those are out of the equation. So if we go that if the SL choice is 0 or SL choice is 1, which we have defined here at the top in our enum, that 0 means inactive, 1 means manual, 2 means pivot point, 3 means S1 and R1, and 4 means S2 and R2. So if it is 0 or 1, which has been selected from the drop down, that means it's either inactive or manual. So I'm coming here and I'm saying if the choice is 0, which means it's inactive, or this is the or sign, and within the brackets there I'm putting 2 conditions, or if the choice is manual, which is 1, but whoever is inputting the value, they have selected here manual but have put 0 in the stop loss. They haven't put a value. If they haven't put a value, then it's as good as inactive. So then if it's inactive or they have chosen manual but they haven't put a value, then the stop loss is 0. Now, if they have chosen the choice is 1, which is manual, and the manual stop loss, the variable that we have given them here to define what it is or how big the stop loss should be, if that is not 0, then there is a valid manual stop loss. In that case, we're basically going to set the stop loss to entry, wherever is the entry point, minus the manual stop loss times points. And that's a conversion, because if they write 500, then we cannot set the stop loss wherever the entry is minus 500, because I mean, let's say Euro USD is 1.10 something. You cannot subtract 500 from it. So you first have to convert it into points, and point is this is a generic multiplier within MQL, which basically looks at the chart, the symbol. Let's say for Euro USD, the point is the fifth decimal. So the value is 1.10417. So a point is the fifth decimal. In case of USD JPY, the price is normally quoted as 98.397. So the point is the third decimal. So it's basically multiplying by point means that we're converting it into whatever is the value of decimals for that symbol. Now the third choice is if the SL choice is 2, which is its PP, then we should set the stop loss to pivot point. But the problem is, if you go back, in case of a bounce, the pivot point is actually above. So you're buying here, your stop loss cannot be above the price. So that's just not possible. So you come back here and you have to say that if the stop loss choice is 2, which is the pivot point, then in that case, the stop loss is still 0 because it's inactive. It's not the correct stop loss. What we also want to do is we also want to send an alert to the guy. So it should pop up on the screen saying that the pivot cannot be stop loss for bounce. So it's an invalid stop. So we're setting the stop loss to inactive. So in that case, we're not only setting it back to 0, but then we're also sending an alert back to the user saying that it's not the right stop loss setting. So if they want to change it, they at least have a chance to change it. Then the next choice they can have is they can set the stop loss to S1 and S2. Now S1 is a bit stupid because if you're opening up the trade just on the bounce, so maybe you're opening up the trade here just above the S1, why are you setting the stop loss to S1? It's only going to be 5-6 pips, but it is still a valid stop loss, so we'll allow it. So in case of S1 and S2, it's a valid stop loss, so we allow it. If you really want to, you can actually send an alert back. I mean, you can follow the instruction and set it to S1, but then you can give them an alert saying that, mate, you're stupid to set the stop loss so close to the entry point. But I'll leave it up to you. Now, in case of the choice being 4, which is either the R2 or S2, then in that case, we set the stop loss to S2. Now, one thing which we have used here is we have used the stop loss as entry minus but we haven't defined entry as a variable or assigned value to it. So we basically need to do that as well. So I come back up here at the beginning of the function and I'm defining these 5 variables: entry, stop loss, TP1, TP2, TP, and lots. And entry, I will assign it by using the function iClose and then go symbol, whatever is the time frame currently, so the time frame for chart, and then the last candle. And basically what I'm doing here is, let's create a separate line. What I'm doing here is basically I'm setting, because we will always be opening trades on the close of the candle because our entire EA runs on tick on a new bar, and that we will define later. So it's only at the opening of the new candle that we will be looking to buy or sell. So our entry is always going to be the close of the last candle. So then I'm saying the entry is equals to the close of the last candle. And then I'm defining the double variables, calling them stop loss, TP1, TP2, TP, and lot size. I wouldn't need really the TP1 and TP2, but we're going to need it later on when we will get to more advanced functions where we will ask the user to input values for TP1 and TP2 separately in case they want to target 2 different take profits instead of 1. For now, we will be running the codes on TP only, but I'm still creating the TP1 and TP2 for later stages as well. Then I'm creating a lots variable where I'll be storing the value of the fixed lot size. If you remember, we asked our user to select here whether it's lot size fixed or risk percentage, and in case if they select risk fixed lots, then they have to provide us a value here as well. But in any case, there's going to be a value here. So this is the value that I'm using here, and in the beginning we will change it, but the default position is fixed lot size. So now that we have defined the entry variable as well, then this makes sense that we have set our stop loss to entry minus manual stop loss times the points. So whatever is the closing of the last candle minus whatever is the manual stop loss that they have provided. So in case bounce is selected and the condition is for buying, then we're going to use this portion of the code. But now let's say if it's a bounce, but we're actually selling, which will be true in condition where we're going to hit the R1. We're going to go up to R1 and then bounce back from the R1. So we will be opening our sell here. In that case, R1 and R2 are valid stop losses. Pivot point is not a valid stop loss. So we're going to do exactly the same, which is if the choice is inactive or if the choice is manual, but the manual stop loss is 0, then the stop loss is 0. If the SL choice is 1, which is manual, and the stop loss manual, the field that we provide our user is not 0, in that case, we're going to set up the stop loss to entry plus the manual stop loss into points because it's a sell, so the TP is going to be above. In case of choice 2, which is PP, we're going to have to set the stop loss back to 0 because PP is not valid. In case of a bounce from R1, if we're selling here, this cannot be a stop loss. And we're going to print the alert saying the pivot point cannot be stop loss. Exactly the same as here. And in case if they choose S1R1 or S2R2 in the drop down here, if they choose S1R1, which is choice 4, and S2R2, which is choice 5, then in that case, we're coming here and saying that if the choice is S1R1, then because we're selling at R1, because we're selling here, so then the stop loss is this. If the choice is number 4, then the R2 is going to be the stop loss. I hope it's clear. If not, leave a comment and then I'll try and explain it more. Then we go on to if the break is selected, then there can be two choices. Then either it's a buy that we're doing or a sell we're doing. And in case if we're doing a buy, then following the same principle, if the stop loss is inactive or it's manual but nothing has been put into the manual stop loss, then it's 0. If the choice is manual and then we basically entry minus the stop loss into points. If number 2 is selected, now in this case where the system is trading the break of R1, which is the case here. So when it's a break and we buy here, then pivot point can be a valid stop loss. S1 can be a valid stop loss and S2 can be a valid stop loss. So in that case, if they have selected PP, then it's PP. If they have selected S1R1, then S1 is the stop loss. And if they have selected S2R2, then S2 is the stop loss. It's not the same condition as here. Pivot point is a valid stop loss. And if we are selling under the second trading style of break, then following the same logic, if the stop loss choice is inactive or then the stop loss is 0. If the choice is manual and manual stop loss value is not 0, then set the stop loss above the entry by the manual stop loss points. If the stop loss is 2, then it's fine. PP is the pivot point is the, I'm saying PP so many times. Then pivot point is the stop loss and it's a valid stop loss. In case the selection is S1R1, then R1 is going to be the stop loss. And if the selection is S2R2, then R2 is going to be. So depending on what they select here, this is how we define our stop loss. Now that we have all of this, one thing that we need to take care of is we're asking the system to use variables S1, S2, PP1, PP and others, R1, R2, but we haven't really defined them here and we haven't sent them from anywhere as well. So we actually have to send those values to the function. Otherwise the function doesn't know what the pivot point is, what the S1 is that we are using here. And the last thing that we need to do here at the bottom, once we have calculated the stop loss, we have to return this value and we say return SL. And this is why we created this function as a double, which means it's going to return a value which can have decimals. And once we have allocated, either after all of these calculations, the stop loss is going to turn out to be 0, or it's going to turn out to be a value, and we need to return this value. Now that we have returned the SL, but meanwhile we have changed this function to also include these values. So when we are calling this function, we also have to here provide the values as well. And this function in itself is receiving the values from another function, but it can pass on those values by basically sending those values further on to the next function. So if I compile it now, we should have 0 errors and the code is working. Now, so far, now we have created a calculation of the stop loss function, and we're calling it here to basically calculate our stop loss. And now we have our stop loss value, which is either going to be a 0 value or it's going to be a non-zero value. So in that case, we have to change this trade.by to conditions saying that if the stop loss is 0 and TP is 0, I'm creating it now because what the situations can be at the end that either the TP is 0 and stop loss is 0, or stop loss is 0 but TP is not 0, or TP is 0. So there can be 4 of those conditions. But in this case, if the stop loss comes back to be 0 and TP is also equal to 0, then we want to buy the trade by providing the symbol as, and I'm starting with lot 0 or lot size as whatever is the fixed loss, and then using the symbol 0, 0 and 0, and this is the value for entry, which saying 0 here in the trade function, in the trade.by function, basically means don't care. So whatever is available. So entry is whatever is available, and then the next one is the 0 for the stop loss, which sending 0 value here basically means sending a null value, meaning don't care, don't set a stop loss. Now the reason I cannot use the stop loss because stop loss is 0 in itself, but if I use the function and if I say it SL to basically supply the 0 value, then the system is not going to regard it as a no value, it's going to regard it as a 0. So it will set a stop loss at the price 0, which in case of buy is fine because price is never going to be 0. But in case of a sell, the system is going to try to set the stop loss at a price of 0, which then is going to be an invalid price for a stop loss. So we cannot use our SL variable. What we need to use is 0, which tells the system that there is no stop loss and there is no TP. But in the second case where the stop loss is not equal to 0 and currently we haven't calculated the TP, well, let's remove it for now and we'll come back and we'll change it when we will write the TPs. So if the stop loss is not equal to 0, then we want to send the command of buy with the lot size with the current symbol, but no preference for entry point, so whatever is the market price available. But this time we're providing the value from the variable SL and we're saying TP, no TP, so inactive. 0 means inactive in this function, and then no comment by saying null. Okay, now here we're using the variable lots, but we still haven't defined the variable lots. And now we need to go ahead and define what our lot size is going to be. And that's going to be dependent back again on whether the user has selected fixed or risk percentage. So let's create that function now. So we go back to the bottom again, and now we're going to create another function here by the name calculate lots, and we will be sending the value of stop loss points to it. And it's a double function, so it's going to return a value which will have decimals, and I'm returning the lot size that I'm calculating through this function. Now I have a separate video for that in the MQL how to series, which explains the entire function of how to calculate the lot sizes. So if you go back and check that, in order to keep this video below 30-35 minutes, I'm not going to go into the explanation here. Alternatively, you can just simply type this code and keep it as a separate one in a file somewhere, and you can always copy paste exactly the same code again and again, and you can use it in as many years as you want. Now that we have this function, so we can come back here up where we were defining the stop loss, and once we have defined the stop loss, then we can go ahead and define the lot size as well. So my starting point is that the stop or the lots is, or I'm defining the variable lots and I'm calling it equals to whatever we define in the fixed lot size, which was the lot size. So lot size, and this is basically starting with the default position of fixed lot size, and then saying that if the lot type, which is, if you remember here, we're asking whether it's fixed lots or risk percent, and we're defining it here as we've given the choice of lot type, and the default was 0. But if it is selected as 1, which is the percentage risk, then we basically have to calculate the lot size. So we start with the default position, and only if the lot type is not fixed lot but risk percent, then we do the calculation. So if the lot type equals 1, then we still have two problems. We have a problem. If the stop loss is 0, which can be the case that the guy has defined it as percentage, but he has selected it as a wrong stop loss, or something goes wrong and the stop loss is 0, then the system cannot calculate. Because in order to calculate the lot size, it needs to know where the entry point is and where the stop loss is. So how big is the stop loss margin or distance from the entry, so as to calculate the lot size. So in case the stop loss at this point in time is 0, then just simply give an alert saying that I cannot calculate the lot size because the stop loss is 0, and then return, meaning exit the function. Don't do anything else, just leave. And if the stop loss at this point in time is not 0, the one that we have calculated here, the calculation of the stop loss comes back to a proper stop loss value, then we can go ahead and then change the lots variable that we have created here from fixed to now lots equals, by calculating the lots using the function that we have created here and providing the distance of the stop loss from the entry. Now because we are buying, so the stop loss distance from the entry is going to be entry minus the stop loss, which is the value that we need to send here in order to calculate the lot size. So now that we have calculated our stop loss first by using the calc stop loss function, then using this stop loss to then say whether if it's fixed lots which has been selected by the user, then basically lot size provided by the user. But in case lot type is 1, which is as a risk percentage, then calculate, and once you have calculated, then we have the lot size as well. So now we can go ahead and say, well, if the stop loss is equals to 0, in that case nothing except for the lot size. But if the stop loss is not equal to 0, then perform a buy with the lots which have been calculated here by providing a stop loss value, but not providing any entry value and not providing any TP value. And once we have bought, then we need to set the S1 already traded to ++, so that the same line is not traded once again. Now we can go ahead and do exactly the same for a bounce back from R1. But when there is a bounce back from R1, in that case, we're actually going to be selling. So if there's a bounce from R1 downwards, so we're going to be selling. And in case of a sell, then we need to calculate the stop loss by sending the value of the position type as sell, so the system knows. And once again, coming back here, if the bounce was selected, then you have to, the second thing the system looks whether or not it's a buy type, position type buy or position type sell. So we're telling position type sell, so it's going to calculate the stop loss using these codes now. So it's going to calculate now using position type sell, and we need to also send the values of PP, S1, S2, and R1 and R2 to the function to calculate. Then for the lot size, it's going to be exactly the same calculation, except for the fact that now because we are selling, we need to provide, or the distance of the stop loss is going to be stop loss minus entry, because it's a sell. So your stop loss is going to be placed above your entry point. So it's going to be bigger in number. So the distance of a stop loss is now going to be stop loss minus the entry to calculate it. Now that we have that as well, so now we need to change this to conditions like above, which is that if the stop loss turns out to be 0 after all of the calculations, then in that case just send 0, 0, 0. And if the stop loss is not 0, then send the sell command, but this time around using for entry nothing, but then for stop loss using our calculated stop loss. So this is how we're going to do it for this. And then the same is going to be true for the other two conditions as well, which is here, because we're going to be buying. So we can copy paste from above exactly the same functions that calculate the lot size using buy and sending the values to the stop loss, do the lot size calculations. And then if the same conditions, if the stop loss is 0 or if the stop loss is not 0. And then finally, I can go ahead and copy paste these values from here down to here. So now the system is going to calculate based on sell, because we're selling here on the break of S1. I think the rest is pretty much the same. And this is it for the calculation of stop losses and the calculation of lot sizes for all 4 possibilities of whether your trading breaks or bounce. And then in that case, where are you setting the stop loss based on user input? Now, before we go ahead and run it, let's just one more thing is we're using this variable entry minus a stop loss. But within this function, we haven't really told the system what the entry value is going to be. So if I come back here, is basically if I create the variable entry again, and it's just equals to close x1, which is the close of the last candle. So if I go ahead and compile it now, I have 0 errors. So now let's go ahead and test the system for various scenarios. So the first one we're going to be looking at, well, bounce and break we checked last time. So let's go with fix a stop loss, but we keep the stop loss as inactive. Let's just start it. And then when the system opens a trade, we can say that it hasn't set any stop loss at all on the break of S1. If we go back again, and now we change it to manual, we should see 50 points or 500 points or 50 pips on a fixed lot size of 0.01. And we see, yeah, the volume is 1. The stop loss is exactly 50 points on the upside, and there is no TP because we still haven't defined it. Then let's go back and change it from fixed loss to risk percentage, and I'm saying risk percentage is 2%. And then if we go here and the system opens up the trade here, sets up the stop loss at 50 points, and based on the calculation, it has determined that the volume should be 0.2 on an account size of 10,000 in the account. The lot size is 2, so that if the price comes back here and hits the stop loss, it's going to be exactly 2%. I mean, you can run the test and see for yourself whether it works. For now, let's go back and let's test our third condition. Let's say if we were to set the stop loss to S2R2. Now, because I'm doing a break of S1, so then my system valid stop losses can be pivot point, R1 or R2, but R1 and R2 are going to be way above the screen. So let's set it to pivot, because S2 and R2 we're probably not even going to see on the screen. So if I say pivot point and then start, then on the break of S1, yeah, we see that the system has now put the stop loss at pivot point, and now it has calculated the volume to be 0.29, because before the stop loss was bigger, so it was calculating it to be 0.2. Now it's calculating it to be 0.29 in order to have 2% risk on the capital. Yeah, in this case, I mean, I think we should have hit the TP here, but because we didn't set any TP, so when the system comes back and it hits the stop loss, let's see how much of a loss we have. And we had a loss of 100 on the account size 10,000, which is not 2%, so something has gone wrong. Let's just quickly go back to our code and see why is it not calculating it. So calculate, it's multiplying by risk percent. If I come back here, risk percent, this is the value that we assigned to it as 1, but this is what we were defining as the variable choices. The actual choice in itself we were assigning to a variable called risk percent. So I need to copy this and then come back down to the calculate lot size and replace the variable, because risk percent is the variable which looks at this field, which is 2 now, and the risk percent variable that I had used in the calculate a lot here before was looking at this value up here as 1. So it was still looking at 1. So now if I go ahead and compile, and now if I go back, now it should be looking at this field. So if I stop and start again, now on the break of S1, it comes down, no TP, so it's gonna go back and hit the stop loss. And if I pause now and go to history, yeah, now we have a 2% losses exactly. So it works now. So this is it for today, guys. I mean, it became a 40-minute long video. I hope that this explained a few errors here and there, but if you followed the entire video, you should be able to fix all of them. I'll do the run as well myself to see if there are any more errors, but then go ahead and check it. And in the next section, we're going to be looking at how to set the TPs. And then we will also then probably in the next video after that, we're going to look at some other functionalities that you can add. So for example, that the system only trades buy or sell, or that if there are so many positions open, then it doesn't open more positions. And we can set a maximum loss for a day. So if the loss or the drawdown exceeds that limit, then the system stops trading and does not trade again until the next day, and those kind of things. So we'll come back with more videos on this until we can complete the entire EA. Leave a comment, hit subscribe and like, because that helps the channel. And leave a comment in case if you find any bugs in the code that we have written so far, so that we can fix it for everybody. So until next time, guys, ciao. I should be coming in the next 3-4 days with the next part. So see you then. Stay safe and trade safe.